Oh yeah, what's happening, boys and girls? Oh, what? A First-Rate Madness by what is it? Nasir Ghani? I don't know how to say the name. I probably should look that up. This is a dope book. You gotta get it. It's great, great. All the stars. You get all the stars. You get the stars in the Big Dipper, Little Dipper. It was hard to put down. Basically, it talks about uncovering the links between leadership and mental illness. As you know, I have a master's in counseling, so this really, the title really spoke out to me, and my good friend Ron Lamprey recommended it to me because you know I got leadership skills and I'm a little crazy. I mean, you got to be. Why not? And this book confirms it. Crazy is good, people. Let's talk about it. Basically, the book talks about the different leaders throughout our history: Lincoln, Churchill, Ted Turner, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Teddy Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, Hitler, and just talked about how all these leaders were all crazy, quote unquote, specifically bipolar, manic depressive. And I know, like right now, there's a lot of stuff in the news about people with mental disorders or mental illness going crazy and shooting and killing. But most people with mental illness don't end up in the news and don't do anything to end up in the news. And a lot of them become leaders, like Gandhi, King, and the rest of them. So there's a benefit to being a little crazy, as this book talks about. So many interesting things, so many reasons to read this. One is so basically depression, as she defines it very simplistically. I'm going to put it because I don't want to spend a lot of time. Is you're focused a lot on the past, whereas mania you're focused a lot on the future. And people who are manic, like they spend a lot, are promiscuous. But they're also very creative and they're very like forward thinking. Well, people who are depressed are more empathetic, also more realistic too, and then they kind of shut off and things like that. So the combination of those two things, if it doesn't get too far out the range, makes for a great leader, as what she talks about. Um, and the thing about people who have mental illness, they're usually not mentally ill. Usually it's more like a cold, like it hits you every now and I don't want to say cold, maybe allergies is a better analogy, to where for the most part they're normal, quote unquote, and then every now and again, boom, the mania or the depression or the voices or whatever that kicks in, but it's not like 100%. It's not always there. It's just something that pops up every now and again, like your favorite TV show, I guess. Um, so some cool things in terms of leadership, because that's what she's talking about, leadership and mental illness. She talks about how when there's a crisis situation, that's when you want somebody who has a mental illness because they can handle it better and they're more realistic about what needs to be done. Almost like you need a pit bull, like you need like Barack is a very healthy guy, mentally healthy. Biden's a little crazy, right? But you need that yin yang. And I think if you look at most successful relationships or partnerships, one person's the straight person and the other person is the crazy person. Especially like if you watch movies, like one's a little off and then the other one's like, I think we should do it like this. So it's good to have that dichotomy. And people who are mentally healthy are good when things are going good. But when stuff hits the fan, you want somebody who's a little off the rocker because they're a little bit more creative and they think more out the box and see uh, more than two or three ways to solve the problem. Some interesting things about the people she talked about. Martin Luther King and Gandhi both attempted suicide when they were teenagers. King jumped out a window twice, second story window. Somebody died and he jumped out the window, tried to kill himself, and then did it again. And was also very promiscuous throughout the whole, march on Washington. I guess he was marching the other chicks' cribs. You know what I mean? But so just the I don't even know what to say. Now what happens? Another interesting thing out the book is she talks about, or he talks about, that is not what happens to you, but is how you feel about what happens to you. In that, so many of our servicemen have went off to war. So many soldiers go off to war, and some come back the same way, and then some come back a little off. But they both experience the same thing, and it's really about how they viewed what happened to them. Which is, like if you look at Oprah, Oprah had that childhood where she was molested, but that made her stronger. Whereas other people in that same situation uh, would not have made it as far as she has, and would have destroyed them, or they would have killed themselves, or what have you. So it's really not what happens to you, people. It's really about how you feel about what happens to you. And to tie into that, she says that sometimes, he says, I don't know why I keep saying she, that early success leads to future failure, and early failure leads to future success. And that when they look at kids who grew up in a harsh environment and had a lot of obstacles to overcome, especially poverty, they later on were more resilient and mentally healthy, as opposed to people who had a good childhood and nothing really happened, and then later on when stuff hits the fan, they don't know how to handle it. So it's a mixed bag, and so you have to know what kind of person you are, so that you know how to navigate around that. So that was interesting. Early success leads to future failure, and I think that's why you see a lot of child stars who, when they get the TV shows as a kid, then grow up and become alcoholics or whatever, because they don't have, because now they got to work for it. And you have the rare ones like Justin Timberlake who are able to surpass that. Churchill considered. And tying back into, is not what happens, but how you feel about what happens. Like, Churchill was a great leader of our time, and still at the end viewed his life as a failure, which is fascinating. In that I think sometimes we look at people who quote unquote have it all, but really it's not about what you have. It's really about what you feel like you have. Somebody can live in a hut and feel like the king, and then some people could live in a castle and feel like they live in a hut. So that was interesting. They was like, oh, I just want to blah blah blah. I can go on and on about this book. Get the book, read it, especially since mental illness is in the news, and so many people I feel like are dealing with it, and we've lost a couple of stars, TV movie stars this year to depression, and I think a lot of people just are afraid to talk about it. Which, last thing I want to bring up is she talks about people who are mentally crazy, not crazy, but suffer from bipolar specifically, um, that they are more likely to admit their mistakes and move on and change direction. Whereas people who are the average person doesn't like to admit their mistakes and digs in even more, even when they see it's not, they don't correct course. They're just like, no, no, I'm gonna trudge through this. And it's interesting because I think that so many of us are afraid to be called flaky or wishy-washy, when really it's a sign of mental health. Changing your mind is a sign of being intelligent and smart, because if you receive new information, then you are supposed to take that in and then adjust your decision based on that, as opposed to, no, I made this decision already and I'm just gonna stick to the course, which the average person does. But somebody who's crazy, like, that's why we go, man, I don't know what he's gonna do next, because they. And I probably shouldn't use the word crazy. I'm sure I'm gonna get some YouTube comments. The word crazy is not the whatever. But you know, I'm talking on the fly, people. Get the book, A First Rate Madness by Nasser Gamey, and I'll see you guys soon.